Well, you've got the right guy, because I can definitely explain that. It's actually one of the main things that I talk about, because we live in a world of monsters. Right now, we live on the edge of the world, let's say. So the way to understand it is, you've probably seen these old maps, Pliny's maps, the ancient maps of the world. The way they were set up was that you, whatever you were, like your identity, if you're Greek or if you were Egyptian or whatever it is that you were, you had your center, you had the omphalos, you had the belly button of the world, let's say. It was like a central space. It could be a temple, not necessarily, but it could be just an object, which would be kind of like the center of the universe for you. In Israel, of course, that was the temple, and especially the Ark of the Covenant. And so then that's you, like that's the thing that joins you together, right? Everything kind of points towards that, and becomes the invisible place, the invisible point where heaven and earth meet, and that you find your highest form of your identity in that place. And so then as you move out, let's say from the temple, at first in the temple, there's just one guy, right? There's just the priest, the high priest is allowed to go into the Holy of Holies. And as you move out, then you've got the priestly caste is allowed to go into the holy place. And then Israelites are allowed to go into the court. And if you move further into let's say the later temples, then strangers were allowed to move into, let's say, the outer courts, were allowed to kind of circulate in this outer court. And so that was the image of the world. So you, like, let's say you were Greek and you move out from Greece and you start to move away from it. At first, you're going to start to see things that you recognize. People like you. At first, people that speak Greek, then maybe some people that aren't you, but like the Persians, right? They've been around them for a long time. You know them. They're strangers, but they're not that strange. Then the further you go, the stranger things become, the less you can recognize them. And then you reach to a place where you don't understand what people are saying. It sounds like noise to you. Bar, 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 right? That's where barbarian comes from. It's like the sound of a dog barking. It's language that you don't understand. And then as you move further and further away, you start to see things that you don't recognize. And you start to not be able to recognize the difference between that which is essential and that which is a detail. So you look at someone, and for example, you encounter a person where you can't tell the difference between ornamentation and their actual face. So imagine now, like let's say the natives in South America. The first time they saw someone come down from a boat on a horse, they saw like an 8-legged god, shining with all this shiny stuff on it, and they couldn't understand what they were looking at. So what they were looking at was a monster. They were looking at something which doesn't have an identity yet, or has a confused identity because it's not part of your identification system. And so that's the experience of monstrosity, which is the experience of something which doesn't have a clear identity to you. And so the way it usually presents itself to you is as mixture. Yeah, because you have categories. Mm-hmm. So you go to Africa and you see this huge thing that's swimming in the water, and you think, oh, it's a river horse, right? It's a hippopotamus. Because you don't have an actual category for it. You have to join it to categories that you already have. And so if you look at dragons, for example, ancient dragons, the way they were represented in ancient texts, they're always hybrids. They're always like a lizard with wings and with hairy feet, let's say. So it's like a mammal, it's a lizard, it's a bird, it's a monster. It's an impossible joining of different categories together because it's something that you don't recognize. So the way the ancient world represented that was that on the edge of the world, there were monsters. You've probably seen these images, right? Of like these men with 1 foot, or like men with heads in their chests, or, the dog-headed men, all of these monsters that exist on the edge of the world, because they are basically all the categories, and also the inversion. So Amazons are on the edge of the world because they're upside down from us. Women are the warriors. Men barely exist. And so all the masculine qualities are now taken up by women in that world. So the upside down, the hybrid, the mixture, the excesses, too big, too little, leprechauns, giants, all of this stuff, right? It's all about the edge of categories, okay? So now think about this image that I gave you about from Genesis to the flood, okay? Now from Genesis to the flood, you have the same structure that I just described. It starts in the garden. You move out of the garden. And as you're moving out of the garden, you start to add these layers and you start to be in a world that's hostile to you, the world of thorns. And then what happens? Mixture between the sons of God and the daughters of men, and you get monsters, you get giants. And the giants appear on the edge of the world in time in this story. So it's like as you move further and further in time from the place where you were in communion with God, then you start to encounter these hybrids, this mixture, these categories that don't fit, that are excessive. And then you reach the giants, and the giants on the edge bring about the end of the world. They bring about the flood, right? They're the cause of the flood, you could say. Okay, so that's the cosmic image. So it's like from the center to the periphery, and as you get to the periphery, that's where you have all the monsters. Now, the monster as a marker of the limit, you could say, as an in-between character, something which marks the difference between two worlds, is also like a bridge. So imagine the two empires, like Roman Empire, Persian Empire, and you know that on the border of those two empires, there's going to be mixture, obviously. There are going to be people that marry Persians, Persians that marry Romans, people that don't even remember whether they're Persians or Romans. They're going to be this hybrid buffer between two identities, this place where two categories are kind of mixed together and aren't clear. And this is just an inevitable part of reality, right? So you have to leave a fringe on the edge of the world, something which is not identifiable, it's not clear, right? So you leave a fringe on your vestment, that's what they say in scripture. You leave the corners of the field untilled for the strangers. So the strangers come to the corners, and they are allowed in the corners, and they're allowed to take some part of your world, but only the corners, because they're not part of you. They're not one of you. They're strange. They're not your identity, okay? So it's just a basic pattern of reality. Now, this plays out fractally, like it actually happens at different levels. So if you're going to separate two things, you're actually going to put a monster on the separation, and that's called a cherub. A cherub doesn't look like the cherubs you see in Indiana Jones. They didn't look like that at all. They were bulls with wings, with human heads, or they had heads of different animals, like how Ezekiel sees the cherub as 4 heads with all these wings. And so they are hybrid creatures because they mark the limit between the transcendent holy and the mundane world, let's say. So if you build a church and you want the church to be in the same pattern as scripture, you want the church to look like scripture, not just in terms of what you say there, what you sing there, but actually the actual architecture of the church. You want it to look like the pattern of scripture, then that's how you're going to make it. You're going to have a holy of holy place where very few people are allowed to go. And on that, on the point of that is going to be the invisible point in communion where heaven and earth meet. And then you're going to have a nave where people can congregate. And that is now it's the people from the church. And in the narthex, which is the entry of the church, that's where you actually had the catechumen before. So during liturgy, even now in the Orthodox liturgy, during the liturgy at some point, all the people that aren't baptized, they get chased out of the church. They're told to leave the church and they go into the narthex. They don't do it anymore. Nobody does it. They still say it sometimes, but they don't actually do it. But in the ancient days, let's say in the first centuries, they would chase all the catechumens out into the narthex. So now you have this image, right, of the priest, of the people, of the strangers that are on the buffer. They're almost inside. They're not totally inside. And then on the edge of the church, that's where you put the monsters. That's where you have the gargoyles. Because that's actually the cosmic image. And the gargoyle acts both as an image of the limit and also as a guardian for that which is even more dangerous from the outside. Right? So it's like monsters are in layers. You have layers of monsters. You have, let's say, a monster like Cerberus in the Greek tradition, where Cerberus, this 3-headed dog, was a guardian. because he was there to stop all the crazier stuff in hell to come into the normal world. And so he is a monster, but he's also a guardian, which protects you from the bigger monsters, let's say, right? So you can imagine like layers of monsters where you have superheroes who are basically monsters. They're all hybrid. They're all Batman and bird this and whatever. Like they're all hybrid kind of monstrous freaks and mutants and all of these freaks that act as guardians. And the first thing they usually guard you from is other superheroes, right? So like the X-Men story is a great version of that. You have these mutants on the edge of the world that are protecting you from what? They're protecting you from mutants. They're protecting you from other mutants because the mutants are super dangerous. So you need a bunch on your side to protect you from the bad ones that are coming in. But behind those mutants, then there are all these galactic monsters, whatever, all these cosmic monsters that are so big that you want to have these kind of buffers to stop the bigger monsters and the demons and the really bad stuff from coming in.